I'm your host, Mark Good, and this is Remarkable, a podcast focused on people and stories worthy of your attention. And now, today's show.
The mission of Substack is to build a new economic engine for culture. And I know some people out there probably rolling your eyes. That sounds quite grandiose. But what the economic engine for culture, what it really means is one person who wants to write, wants to put their opinions out, wants to put their fiction out, whatever it is, or one person who wants to launch a podcast, that they can do it on Substack. There's no upfront cost. That's really important because there are many barriers. One is cost. Another barrier is a gatekeeper has to like you and give you permission and then edits you. What Substack has come and offered is a way to publish and talk to the world via the internet without all that. We, I think at Substack, learn from the people using the site. We observe what people are doing. We observe how people use it. That guides the product roadmap. And it tells us, are we doing a good job in achieving the vision and the goals?
Would like to welcome Linda LeBrun to my Remarkable podcast. Linda is just north of me across the Great Lake Erie in the Toronto area. I'm in the Cleveland area in the United States. It's cool in my part of the country. How about where you are?
Mark, I stay cooped up inside working hard for Substack, so I have no idea. I'm just kidding. It's actually I'm looking out the window right now and it's super sunny and gorgeous. So I think we're actually going to have a beautiful Toronto weekend. I'm hoping so anyway.
So when you use the word beautiful and sunny, talk to me in terms of temperature, because that means something different depending on where you live.
It's hot. It can get hot. It can get mid-20s. I'm in Celsius land. You'll forgive my metric, but things are...
So when you hear mid-20 degrees Celsius, you might be tempted to think, that's kind of chilly. But if you translate that into Fahrenheit, that's about 75 degrees. I'm not sure I'd call that hot. But then, I'm not Canadian.
Things are not getting as hot as they do for a lot of my colleagues. I have colleagues all over the USA. Some are in San Francisco, which notoriously is not that hot for California. But I think we've had some rainy weather, but I think we have some really beautiful, nice weather this summer. So I've been trying to get out and about into the parks.
That's wonderful. Good. Super. Well, I want to welcome you to my show. And I'd like to begin by asking you to give us a little bit of your professional background, because when we were talking off mic before the show, you told me a little bit about that history, and it's different than I expected. So share that with our listeners.
For those who don't know, Mark and I met each other because he is a publisher on Substack and I'm an employee at Substack, which is we'll talk more about it, but it's a publishing platform where people publish podcasts, text, video. And the background of me, a lot of people who I'm fortunate to work with, they worked in the tech industry all their life. They may be software developers. I work with some people who, like myself, work with writers and podcasts, and some of them have backgrounds in the publishing industry or the arts and culture. For myself, it's different. I was in the investment business for my entire career. And I worked on the buy side and the sell side. I was a portfolio manager. So for 15, 20 years, I was doing that type of work. And it was just during the pandemic, I had a career reassessment and was very interested in tech and interested in startups. And really, a lot of it was coming across Substack and liking the mission and values and people and what they were trying to do. And came over and had a midlife career reinvention and transition and started doing this very different thing. And it has been super fun. So sometimes I will talk to people who are working in the finance, working in the investment industry, and they'll hear what I'm doing. And they'll be very fascinated because sometimes it feels like once you're in your 40s, certainly, okay, whatever I've been doing, that's the skill set I've got. And how can I really make a big change? But you can make a big change. You have to be willing to look like an idiot sometimes because you have to figure out a lot of things from scratch.
My brief acquaintance with you, I've yet to see you look like an idiot. But maybe the idiocy is behind the curtain. I don't know. I try to keep my idiocy hidden, so I can relate.
Don't we all? It's like the Wizard of Oz. It's a lot of, when I say that, some of it is So you're going from an environment where some people will know that in Canada, the equivalent of Wall Street is Bay Street. So I worked on Bay Street, which is just shorthand for working in finance and working managing money. And it's just it's a much less technologically sophisticated world. And it's a world where if something goes wrong with your computer, you just call an IT guy and he fixes your life. When you work for a startup, and there are 90 employees and everybody is busy with something, there is no IT guy. You were the IT guy. You better be Googling and you better be figuring out how to use all these different pieces of your workday. And my work is 100% remote, so I'm at home. That's also something very different. A lot of us did it during the pandemic and adapted to it during the pandemic. But for me, it's so different. For many years, I was commuting. I had a long commute for years, every single day. And now here I am sitting just as I am with you in front of my computer at home. So just lots of changes and lots of things to figure out how to make them work for you.
Talk a little bit about your kind of day-to-day responsibilities at Substack. And also for those, and again, this is my first time to actually talk at length, and it happens to be for an episode. Talk a little bit about Substack itself, because it's a different animal in terms of a service. And there are a lot of things that make it attractive to people like me, and certainly to you as somebody who came to work for them. But talk a little bit about Substack, the company, its mission, and then what you do.
Absolutely. Maybe I'll start with the 30,000 foot on Substack, and then we'll drill down into what is my day-to-day. So Substack was founded 7 years ago, and the three founders were two engineers and a journalist. The journalist part is important because journalists have a different perspective on what writers, podcasters, and creators need from a platform, from a website, than maybe a digital marketing person would.
Absolutely.
So their concept, their idea was that the way that the media business was going, first of all, lots of journalists were losing their jobs. They did not have a easy way to, even if they had the proverbial 1,000 true fans, they didn't have a way to set up, ask those people to pay to support them on a sustainable basis so it could be a reliable income, and then put their writing, put their audio, put their video onto the internet. There was all these different people. You could make a blog. You could ask people to pay you using Stripe. You could put video on YouTube, but there was no way to package it up and have people pay directly rather than using the traditional advertising-based models. The CEO of Substack is Chris Best, and he says, there have been advertising-based models on the internet for 30 years. That's figured out. That's a solved problem. But for an individual person or a small team, or for somebody who just doesn't want to be redirecting attention to a brand, but wants to ask their audience to support them, there really wasn't one easy, packaged, works out of the box solution. So that was the idea that they went and pitched and raised money behind. And that was the idea they started building and promoting 7 years ago. So fast forward now, and the values are the same. The mission of Substack, I'm smiling because tech people can be highfalutin. The mission of Substack is to build a new economic engine for culture. And I know some people out there are probably rolling your eyes. That sounds quite grandiose. But what the economic engine for culture, what it really means is one person who wants to write, wants to put their opinions out, wants to put their fiction out, whatever it is, or one person who wants to launch a podcast, that they can do it on Substack. There's no upfront cost. That's really important because there are many barriers. One is cost. Another barrier is a gatekeeper has to like you and give you permission and then edits you. What Substack has come and offered is a way to publish and talk to the world via the internet without all that. So that is the 30,000 foot of what Substack is, the sort of quick story of what Substack is. If I'm talking to somebody and I just want in a sentence, I might say it's an email newsletter platform. But if my boss heard me describing it that way, I'd get my wrist slapped because it's so much more. It's podcasting, it's video. But what's very easy for people to understand is, I can have an email newsletter. I can send out emails. And important part, I own and control the email list. It's not, if you're on YouTube, if you're on Twitter, if you're on LinkedIn, you can post to the world, but you don't own the relationship because you don't have the email list. With Substack, if you decide you want to ever leave Substack, you can export your email list and off you go. You owning the list and you owning the payment relationships is, in essence, you owning the business. So the way of course, I work for Substack. I'm going to give a very positively biased rundown of what it is, but all of what I just described, when I was thinking that I might like to do something different in my career 3.5 years ago, and I knew a couple of people who were very thoughtful, smart people writing about investing, writing about the stock market, writing about industry. And they had started writing on Substack. And just as solo people writing, they were making incomes off it, material incomes, which was hard to do as a blogger. As a traditional blog, had the PayPal tip jar, but on Substack, it's really set up to encourage paid subscriptions. So they were getting that holy grail, which is recurring revenue. I thought, well, this is a cool idea. This seems like something that might get bigger. So what is my job really? I think at any start, the Substack is only 90 odd employees right now. At any startup, there are really only two jobs, okay? You're either building the product or selling the product. Like it really boils down to that. There's nobody who's like swanning around going, oh, what should we acquire? Like this, it's not IBM, it's a startup and everybody is either has on their mind. And selling doesn't mean, I would say selling means something unique perhaps at Substack, because think of what my sales job is. Much of what I do is I'll go out and if they are a journalist, they work at an existing publication, or they are somebody who's doing investigations, publishing them somewhere online. They might have an existing platform, but it might not be an independent one. Maybe they want an independent one. They might be a podcaster who is struggling because the market for advertising-based monetization of podcasts has changed. It's deteriorated somewhat over the past few years. And they're thinking, maybe some people are getting their audiences to pay to support them. Maybe I could do that. Maybe I could paywall some content. Whoever it is, myself and my colleagues on the writer partnerships team, a lot of what we do is evangelizing how Substack could work for them and then helping them get started with it. So anybody can come, anybody who's listening to us right now, you can come on Substack, you can set up your own thing. It is designed to be very easy. Don't need to talk to anybody. But for people who are bigger prospects, let's say, who might have more complex things that they're doing, great example would be, and you probably have seen this, Mark, because it's been all over Substack notes, is Mehdi Hassan, who used to be a big name at MSNBC, parted ways from MSNBC, and he started a Substack called Zeteo. It's completely independent. It's him and people that he has assembled into a team to put out content. So with him starting that, people on my team were talking to him, interacting with him, sharing best practices. He's got the same set of tools as everybody does. Sometimes people ask this. They say, well, it's somebody who's big comes to Substack. Are there certain things that they have? Do you guys do certain things for them? Ultimately, it's assisting them in using the same toolbox that everybody has access to. But it's to our benefit to want people to have as great launches as possible. Because here's the last thing I'll say about the business model. The only way Substack makes money is if people turn on paid subscriptions. Substack has a platform fee of 10%. That's it. There's no cost to get started. There's no advertising. Sometimes people say to me, do you guys do anything with those email lists? Absolutely not. That would be a violation of trust. Only way we make money is if the writers make money. So often people I meet or chat with on Substack notes, they'll be curious. They'll be like, what exactly is she? She doesn't seem to be an engineer. What does she do? It's the writer development role. It's the evangelism role. It's the helping people get started role.
No, that's really fascinating. And of course, now that I have you on the show, I have a captive audience to some degree,
yes,
that I can ask questions of because I'm a newbie Substacker. I've only been active about 75, maybe 90 days, really active. I signed up a couple of years ago. I didn't do anything with it. It was a dormant, for all intents and purposes, account, but jumped both feet in with my first, if you will, digital work product, which is a podcast. And I'm really using it as an opportunity to get my sea legs, so to speak, to really understand podcast as a platform and to understand the various tools, the dynamics of how the system works, how people interact and respond, not only to my content, but to other people's content. One of the things that I wanted to point out, which I think is very interesting as I was listening to you, you're right. A lot of people there are people who have had blogs of their own that they have to some degree monetized. I mean, most have not figured out how to do that. The tip jar is a great example of something back in the early days of blogging, right? But when you went to that blog site, it was that blog site. It was a URL. It was for that blog site, period. One of the things that to me makes Substack interesting is that it really is a community of creators. And you can, to the degree that a creator will allow you to do this, you can take a peek at what they're doing. So you can visit whether it's a newsletter, a podcast, video, Maybe if they have a paywall, maybe they'll let you look at a little bit of it, or they may publish some stuff with the notes feature, which I want to get back to in a moment. But that community aspect I find very interesting because it's like being in a shopping mall. You can go around, or a bazaar if you're shopping for fruits and veggies. You go around and you sample other people's wares. What is that? And for me, it's inspiring. It's instructive. I see what other people are doing who are developing and growing their Substack presence in a way that for me is like a North Star. It's, I want to be like that, or that, right? And that to me is a real value add of the platform because of that. Secondly, the platform encourages dialogue and discourse between the creators, right? For instance, if I go to Instagram and I'm posting photos on Instagram and reels and all that kind of stuff, there's places for comments. But if I want to talk to somebody on Instagram, I have to, as the saying goes, slide into their DMs. And they may or may not respond to me, and it's awkward. It almost feels like I'm opening the door to the back room and saying, hey, can we talk? But with Substack, it's very much upfront, and you're invited or actually encouraged as a creator to interact with others if you have time and if you so choose. And so it's very much an upfront sort of creator space, which again is different than what I've seen on any other platform, which again, I don't know if that was the intention of the founders, probably was, but I find it really beneficial. So those are a couple of things that I've noticed as a newbie Substacker that makes Substack different than the Instagrams, the Facebooks, or solo blogs, which you had talked about earlier.
It's edifying that you describe it that way because it was the precise intentions of the product team that Substack be a network and be a community. When I came to Substack 3 years ago, it really was a series of silos. Certainly the tools for publishing were terrific. They were always simple, straightforward, easy to use. Certainly the ability to set up payments, I think it always worked well. But what writers asked us for over and over, it wasn't, I want to be able to make my text bigger or smaller, different colors. It was, help new people find me. I need discovery solved. I'm exhausted going out to every social media site, posting like it's my job and trying to funnel people to my work. Can you solve that for me? So I think for the past few years, what we have been trying to do is develop exactly what you're describing, which is to feel like it's people will roll their eyes at the word, but an ecosystem of people who are writing, creating, podcasting, can learn from each other, can come for free. It can go all the way from starting their first day and they've got 3 people signed up and one of them is their mom, to building a media empire without ever needing to leave Substack because they can grow, learn on Substack. They can find new people to subscribe to their stuff because of the recommendations feature, because of notes, because I can go comment on someone else's Substack, because I can send a direct message to another writer. All these features, you can see they're directed towards one thing, which is just creating an area where people really feel like, hey, I'm part of something greater and it's helping me achieve what I want to do with my writing, with my content, whatever it is. Because to just make a website where you can post a blog, that existed. To just have a platform where you can send out emails, I could name about 10. Those would not be innovations. The innovation was to get the creative people to feel attracted and magnetized to come. You have to build something where they feel like it really serves them. And then when you get a critical mass, boy, is that ever an advantage.
I think another thing about this, and you talked about it earlier in your remarks about Substack, is one of those places where you grow and develop an email list that you own. But there's a sort of a first order effect of that, is that an email list is by definition personal. And so as you grow your email list, it is people. As you get followers, they are people. Right. The problem I have with social media is that I always feel like I'm screaming into the void. I never, unless somebody responds with a like, and then I may or may not know who that is, or comments with some abstract handle that they're using, right, in that social media world. It just feels weird. And of course, bots exist, right, in the world of Twitter, which has been overrun with bots. Am I even really talking to a human being it's awful. So the world of social media has become not only out-driven and dense, but it's also impersonal, and which is paradoxical because many of these were started with the view of, oh, let's get connected. Let's bring the world together. And Instagram, share your images with family and friends. Now it's an algorithmic beast that's interested in promoting products or services, which my feed is full of, right? And people who comment use handles. So it feels very impersonal. Whereas Substack, when I return to the sort of topic at hand, I feel like I know who's listening to me. I know who's following me on Substack. I get feedback and comments from other creatives. And all that makes it feel, and again, this is a word that some people go, oh, Mark, don't say that. But it does feel like an online community. It really does. That is, it's interesting. In the United States, the Surgeon General has taken some really unusual positions or made some unusual declarations. And one of those is that he said, in our country, we face an epidemic of loneliness. And what I find interesting is that when I observe new people come to Substack and they start posting things in notes and people respond, they always almost light up and go, oh my gosh, real human beings talking in a civil manner, right? Because we know each other's names, right? We kind of live on Substack, right? And they go, oh my gosh, this is so good for me. And then the next sort of series of comments you hear from it is almost like a natural evolution. You have a social scientist study this. The next step is, I just don't have time for Instagram anymore. I'm really leaving Twitter behind. Or Facebook is just not that interesting. And then on a positive note, I find myself spending more and more time on Substack. And that's certainly me. That's it. It is my go-to online community now. Whereas I used to go to others, they're second, third, fourth, fifth, and a long way behind in terms of the amount of attention that they get from me. And again, I think it's for all the reasons that you've described as what kind of community intentionally the founders and the team itself have said we want to build.
Yeah. One of my favorite thinkers and investors was Charlie Munger, and he said, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. Twitter, I still use Twitter. Twitter is still where you can go for now for the flow of news. But the problem with Twitter is their incentive is to keep you on Twitter and scrolling, and their incentive is to show advertisers, look how much activities there is here. So when I post some authentic thought and then get excited, oh, I've got a reply, and it's clearly from a bot, clearly from some server somewhere, just fake to get interaction. It's a wasted energy, wasted time. This same thing on if I am trying to interact. You gave some examples of Facebook, Instagram, and I feel like being sucked into. I used to like posting photos on Instagram, but now the algo is rewarding video, so I have to do video. That's not fomenting creativity. If you're serving something that is specifically designed, again, to appeal to an advertiser, they can have their business model. That's something separate. They'll continue to make billions of dollars. But I think what foments true community and people connecting and people not being lonely is a real human being. The ultimate test of how real is your connection is when they are willing to actually pay. But even if you don't have paid turned on your Substack, here's something often when I connect with people, they will be like, you probably don't want to talk to me because I'm not interested in ever going paid, or I have no short-term expectation of turning on paid. The entire network gets stronger the more people that come. So there are some very top people on Substack that may not have turned on their Substack now or ever, but we're delighted for them to be there. And what you mentioned about the more you get into the Substack community, the less drawn you feel to post elsewhere. There's a really top Substack called Doomberg, like Bloomberg, but with a D. Wow. And they're the number one by revenue finance Substack. And their story is, and if people are interested in them, they've appeared on tons of podcasts. They've told their story of building their Substack. They're very generous always with sharing what they have learned. They started their brand on Twitter. I think it was on Twitter and Substack at the same time. And as they evolved on both, they built a huge following on both. And then at some point they made a post on Substack and they said, we're not going to use Twitter very much anymore. We're not going to be interacting the way that we did. And we appreciate what was useful to us about that, but it's not serving us anymore. So we'll just, when we post things on Substack, we will repost them on Twitter, but we're really going to focus on our long form here on Substack, which clearly that is their business too, and they've done really well with that. And that really, I think at Substack, learn from the people using the site. We observe what people are doing. We observe how people use it. That guides the product roadmap, and it tells us, are we doing a good job in achieving the vision and the goals? And I think when I saw that, because I do work and deal a lot with the finance, trading, macroeconomics type writers and analysts, I really thought, okay, that's such a good sign that such a canny business person would say, that is not worth my time anymore. I'm going to concentrate over here. That's a decision. Nobody can sell them on that. Neither Twitter nor Substack cannot make somebody do something. They are choosing freely, and they have to decide for themselves what serves them. So it's fascinating to hear yourself and people like you there. And I see it on notes too, people saying like, I just feel more drawn to this because I don't have this algorithmic leash around my neck.
So let me turn the conversation a little bit back to product. But what I want to talk about is Substack started as a place for writers, right? So people who are putting words on, we would say paper, but it's actually on a digital form, right? And then somebody somewhere, I don't know who it was, right, within Substack said, there's other forms of media that people are creating. We know video because of YouTube. We know audio because of podcasts. And they said, we want to make the tent a little bit bigger. We'd like to, not just words, we'd like words that are spoken, podcast, right? And we'd like moving pictures, right? Stills, but video as well. How has those changes, I should make it as plural, impacted from 2 points of view? One is, how is the team within Substack beginning to think about that? Because now they're truly a multimedia sort of platform. They're not a single media, they're a multimedia platform. And how is that affecting people who are looking at Substack as a place to be creative? This shift from single media to multimedia. Talk about that a little bit.
When we set ourselves to the task of being the economic engine for culture, I think the most important word in that sentence is culture. Culture is much more than just writing, even though the first love of the Substack founders, and any founder is themselves a creator, they are creating the business, and they wanted to create something for writers that would be a comfortable and profitable and sustaining space for writers. But as they went on, it was really guided by the users, and they would see people on Substack and they'd be writing on Substack, and then they'd say, oh, I just launched my podcast and it's over here hosted somewhere else. Or they'd say, oh, check out this video on YouTube, and they'd embed a YouTube video. For a product person, that gets their brain thinking, this should be able to be done natively because we could make it easier, and we could make it really important part for the economic sustainable part. We could make it so people could paywall some of their audio, paywall some of their video. So it was really just watching what people were doing and then following it and trying to build that. While at the same time, I noticed that if you download the Substack app, it says a place for readers. It's still going to be a place for readers. And when I reach out to people, Substack is still highly identified. What names do I drop if I'm trying to impress somebody about Substack? I say, well, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Margaret Atwood and Roxane Gay. And I'm talking about writers by and large. But who did I mention earlier in this conversation? Mehdi Hassan, who's a very video and podcasting oriented journalist. So I think it's following what people want to do and trying to solve more problems for more people. And then the last piece is sometimes we've seen it on notes, right? There is some conversation from the Substack old hands who have, in some cases, been posting on Substack longer than I've been working at the company. And they say, oh boy, it's happening again. Something that I like is turning into TikTok. They're right to be nervous because this is what, and I hate to say it, like my colleagues are going to probably listen to this. This is what Silicon Valley tech companies often do. They get seduced by the shiny object and say, oh, now let's serve somebody else. As long as the founders breathe air, we will never go away from serving writers. It will always, what we're trying to do is expand the tent. Substack is still pretty small, okay? If you look at the actual numbers, when you go on Substack Notes, it feels very fun, it feels very active, but our aspirations are to be much, much bigger. So our mentality is, look, if we're bringing new people into the Substack extended universe, that ought to be good for anybody who has been, people who have been working away for 1, 2, 3 years on Substack ought to be seeing the benefits of new people coming and knowing what it is. If we went out on the street here in Toronto, where I live today, I'd love to do the experiment, ask 100 people, have you heard the name Substack? Because sometimes I say where I work and people light up. Oh my gosh, they mention a few names they follow. But often I will mention the name and they'll say, oh, what's that? Something to do with submarine sandwiches. It's a Subway competitor. So we've got to get a lot more people knowing what Substack is. I'm wandering all over the place here, but the ultimate idea is we want to follow what writers, creators, podcasters want, and we want to make a bigger tent, a bigger funnel, more people to the party.
Okay, so again, because I've got you captive, this now gives me the opportunity to, you said what writers, podcasters, and video people want. Okay, so I'm a podcast.
Yes.
Let me tell you a few things that I want. And this is not a complaining session. This is hopefully a pipeline to some developers on the West Coast, or wherever they've been. So one of the things that continues to, I would say, not tempt me, but remains attractive about what I call standard or traditional podcast hosting platforms, right? Transistor.fm, Spreaker.fm, Libsyn, et cetera, right? Is they have really extensive metrics in terms or analytics. How many downloads did this particular episode have? What's your download trend? Which between all of your episodes, how are they tracking? This is what on this day people were, or in this period, this week, this month, I'm going to stack rank your episodes, and show you this got 115 listens, this got 1,000 listens, because as a podcaster, that sort of quantitative feedback, those sort of analytics enable me to tune my deliverables, right? Because it's my feedback mechanism to understand what my audience is finding attractive. I have a podcasting client because I not only podcast myself on Substack, but I'm a producer for some other shows. And one of these guys, he produces a podcast, or I produce a podcast for him, are people who've suffered traumatic brain injury. And he started, one show a month, and his listenership started scaling, right? And then a couple of months ago, he said, Mark, I want to go to 2 shows a month. What's fascinating is that we can look at his episodes, and his name is Jeff, and I can say, Jeff, here's what people are finding interesting. So as you think about your show calendar over the next 3, 6, and 9 months, these are the kinds of things your audience wants to hear. How do I know that? It's because it's like a buffet. It's what they're eating. They come to the table and they like this a lot more than this, right? That's the kind of thing as a podcaster on Substack that I would like to see. What it shows me today these are the downloads you've gotten per day. And then I can go to a specific episode and it'll tell me, here are the number of downloads this episode has gotten, but there's no context for it. I can't see how many downloads of this episode on that day. So in a period of time.
Got it.
And that sort of stuff. Hey, you're a finance person. You get what I'm talking about. This is just basic charts and graphs, right? But those are the kinds of things for me as a podcaster would be really valuable, because right now, as I think about scaling my podcast, I'm asking myself, what are the kinds of topics? Who are the kind of people? What is the messaging that I need to be doing to scale my listenership? And that's what I look to the hosting platform to provide me, that kind of quantitative information as a podcaster, so that I can, as I say, adjust fire, right? And hit the target.
Yeah, thank you so much for that feedback. And I know that is being worked on for sure. We had a journey with analytics and stats for text posts, where if you saw what we had 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, it was very rudimentary. And people fed back to us over and over, I need to know more about where my audience is coming from. I need to know more what they're clicking, what they're interacting with, and for it to be presented very clearly. And I think we have advanced by leaps and bounds on that side. But podcasting, partly just it being newer on the platform,
sure.
I think that we're getting there. But it resonates with me what you're saying, the ability to stack rank and just say, out of these topics, which one should I lean into? So I think I will feed that back to the product team, because I think that is something that other podcasters would also find useful.
Another thing that I think all of us as Substackers, not just podcasters, would welcome, and again, we talked about this off mic, is periodic webinars, seminars done by Substack about best practices. And best practices aren't just how to grow. They can be things related to content, how to interact with notes, when to use audio if you're not a podcaster, when to use video, what are the things that have been observed over time. And as I pointed out in that conversation we had off mic, there are people who jump on Substack and who experience a certain level of growth, and then they excitedly post, I've gotten this many subscribers in this period of time. Follow me or subscribe. And if you pay me $5 or $10 a month, I'll tell you my secrets.
Sure.
And as we talked about, there are no secrets. It's just best practice. Substack presenting that, or even getting a Substack, a producer to participate, but without a pecuniary interest, I think would go a long way to those of us who are looking for that sort of guidance to make better the platform, but who are not interested simply because of conflict of interest. I don't want to pay somebody $5, $10, $20 a month or whatever for some secret sauce, which quite frankly, it's like learning how to ride a bike.
Yeah, the secret is there are no secrets, and nobody is. You're quite right that if somebody is, I think as Substack grows, we're going to see people who have expertise in Substack, the ins and the outs, this sort of meta posting where it's posting on Substack about Substack. You are becoming an expert yourself. So we will have, I think it's inevitable, and I've seen it with other platforms, the Patreons, the ConvertKits, the longer that WordPress, the longer they're around, there starts to be a cohort of people that talk about how can you be successful on this? What I would say is Substack has a lot fewer complicated nooks and crannies. We're trying to make it something that anybody can just hop on and know how to use it in a few minutes. It's not WordPress. Even people who work at WordPress would say, oh gosh, yeah, it is. You need to hire somebody. But with the Substack, you ought not to need to hire somebody if we do our job. So the first thing is nobody needs to look behind a curtain to figure out how to be successful, because what you're going to hear is going to be what will resonate with intuition, which is, and I'll reveal the secret right here, it's being consistent. It's interacting a lot on the platform and getting to know other writers and trying to cross-pollinate with other writers. And it's maximally using all of the features like recommendations, like DMs, like notes. And we, to your point, we as Substack want to seek more opportunities to say this, because then people will realize, no, there's no magical feature I'm missing out on. I just need to do all the things that have made anybody be successful on any platform, except that thinking about serving an algorithm is not necessary. The example you gave of Jeff, who has the podcast about traumatic brain injury, is that really resonates, because sometimes having something that is a niche does really well rather than something very broad.
Right.
Think about the stereotype of Medium, and again, Medium existed for a long time. A lot of writers got their start on Medium, but the stereotype of Medium, that it would be all these articles about 6 things successful people do before breakfast, because more general was better. And Substack is not like that. Substack is more like, if you can find niche and drill down, you may have 200, 500, 1,000 people, and you still may have a very meaningful interaction with them, and or a meaningful number that are willing to pay to support you, because they can't find that anywhere else. So if I was, in addition to the facets of post consistently and use the tools, I would also say, this is going to sound a little bit MBA. Think about what job you are doing for the reader or listener. Think about value proposition. And none of it's rocket science. None of it is secret. So I think that I really appreciate what you're saying about, okay, rolling your eyes at this idea that there's some secret you can pay for. And the more Substack, hey, I'll give people something to take a look at. Just like what you're saying we ought to do, we just did one about using video on Substack. So my colleague named Rhonda, Randa, did a seminar, like a video webcast with video creators talking about how to do video on Substack. And the reason I spell her name is in case people want to Google this. Yeah. I actually just reposted it on my Substack notes. So I am going to be watching it after work today because I would like to learn too. This is how we learn. We are not telling people how to use Substack. We're building the tools, we're observing, and then we're trying to share best practices. So more and more, I think you're going to see us trying to be more systematic about doing that. But right now, small team, big aspirations, running around like chickens with our heads cut off. But we want to help people more to succeed.
How, because it's like in the air and it seems like every tech article I read, it has the 2 initials AI in it. What thoughts does Substack have about AI? And this is many points of view. One is, it seems like everybody wants to bolt on a chatbot or integrate AI as a writing assistant to their products. Apple's doing this with their, I think it's humorous, their Apple Intelligence that they've announced for iOS 18. Google is doing this. A lot of people are doing this to get AI to assist you in writing. And of course, Substack is a writing platform. Certainly people could write on a different platform and use an AI writing assistant and then copy and paste over to Substack. But
yes,
is there a view that AI could add value to the creator community within Substack? Let me put it to you that way.
Yes. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm at Substack for how we can use AI to enhance the experience that writers and creators are having. However, there is also a trend, and I don't come from the tech industry. There is a trend in the tech industry that the highest and best use of AI is to take human beings and take human creators out of the loop.
Correct.
And that the best thing that you could do is just wipe away anybody who's an illustrator, anybody who's a writer, and somehow a chatbot is going to adequately replace them.
Correct.
Which is ludicrous and offensive to many people who use Substack and many people who work at Substack. We could probably have a debate with one of my colleagues who could say, look, you're being too negative. The point is, like you said, Mark, that it can help writers. But I would say we're being very cautious and thoughtful and keeping to the ethos of Substack, which is that the purpose of technology is to enhance human capability and human freedom, not to the idea of replacing anybody. I'll give an example of this that I think is ludicrous. So if you go on, I shouldn't be picking on our competitors, but just among us, you and me, Mark, and whoever's listening, if you go on LinkedIn, okay,
right.
A LinkedIn post will give you suggestions of AI responses.
Oh, I know.
So I'm going to post on LinkedIn and then I'm going to have 30 AI responses that someone clicked a button. How is that? Something like that is not the aspiration. But what is the aspiration is, for example, if somebody has a podcast on Substack, once you are finished uploading your episode, a transcript can generate automatically and you can put it underneath your podcast so that you, just like that, and for free, you have a transcript. People used to pay cents a word. It used to be very expensive to generate even just a few years ago, very expensive to generate a good transcript because you would need a human being to type it out. Typing out transcript is not the highest best use of human labor. So that's something where AI makes sense. Or let's say creating a summary, or you can think of examples where it is using it to make the writer experience better as opposed to replace. The thing I've been a little pointed. Nothing I've said is the overall Substack view other than we want to ensure that whatever tools are available, that they're available to people using Substack, just as they would be if somebody had an entire newsroom or a big media operation. The whole point of Substack is to bring the tools of the big shops to the individuals. But the idea of, hey, guys, we just introduced a new AI bot and you don't have to write posts anymore. You just click a button. If that ever happens, look at the calendar because it's probably April 1st.
Yeah. To me anyway, there's an analogy to what's going on. And I'll draw from my bride, who is a lover of all things, if you will, handmade purses, one-off clothing, things like that. And when we first got together, we started dating and ultimately got married. It opened my mind to this whole world of, if you will, fashion and things that I had just not expressed any interest in my past. And one of the things that I observed is that there's a part of the fashion industry that's all industrialized, right? So fast fashion is a great example of that. A dress appears on some runway somewhere, photographs are taken, it's shipped off, likely to China, and within a matter of 24 to 48 hours, copies of that come back, right, through the channels of distribution as an inexpensive product. And the thing that makes all that work, there can be low-cost labor involved in a lot of this, but often it's machines, it's industrialization, and the machines have replaced people, right? Whereas there's a whole nother world of fashion in which the products are designed and created by artisans, right? Now, the artisans use tools, there's no question, but the artisans are never replaced. And I think that when I think of Substack, it is a community of artisans, some of whom put words to paper, others like myself who speak, others who produce video, but we're the artisans. If machines, and I use this word because the AI is really fundamentally based on a machine. If AI replaces the artisan, such as what OpenAI is seeking to do with their Sora video product. If they want to replace actors and all kinds of stuff in Hollywood with this, mechanized, again, that's very industrial to say mechanized, but it is, because it's literally bits and bytes moving in a piece of hardware, then you've displaced the artisan. And so I think for those of us who are artisans, and the word is creatives, but I also think of us as artisans, certainly to bring a new tool to the table is great. Tools that displace artisans, and you gave a great example with LinkedIn. LinkedIn is removing the authenticity of a response. So it's really less than human, right? Because if I'm just clicking on a button, oh, that sounds great, or here's some suggested remarks, that's not me. That's an algorithm somewhere that's created that. And then, oh, by the way, the other piece of LinkedIn is when it says write a post, it goes, why don't you let AI help you write that post? Now I've got machine to machine, right? I've got a post that is artificially generated, a response that is artificially generated. Man, I can just turn off the lights and go home.
Yeah, that's it. It's like at some point, it's like everything is written by a machine and the audience is bots too.
Right.
Like it's just stuff churning away on a server somewhere. It's not even touching, or that's not going to touch or affect any human being. Is this the dream of technology? Is this technology solving problems?
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad to hear that. And it certainly comforts me. But again, this is not to stifle any creative ideas or innovation that the devs have about how AI can be used, because I don't know the code base. I don't know the architecture of the company. I'm certainly not privy to the vision other than what you've shared. So I'm not here to constrain anything, but
not at all. And I don't want to give the impression that Substack is anti-AI. Our mentality is it's got to be supportive of human creativity, human freedom, and human money making. If you are on Substack, what is going to help you to expand the size of your audience? And I'll give an example of where machine learning could be useful and handy. I've had people who I say to them, and you and I met on Notes, so Substack Notes, the short form posting surface that is on the Substack app. And I've said to people, if you want to get into Substack, best thing you can do, download the app and start looking and follow some people, subscribe to some people. So I said this to someone, and while she was on the call with me, she downloaded the app and she looked and she said, okay, how do I find finance stuff on here? And I mentioned some individual people, but right away, if you're a product person, you're thinking, what should be able to happen? And we've actually built this now where when you download the app for the first time, it's going to ask you, what are some of your interests? If somebody downloads the app, and I gave the example of Doomberg earlier, somebody downloads the app, knows nothing about Substack, they just happen to hear the word Substack on CNN or something, download the app, we should be able to say to them, if they click on finance, then it should show them not only Doomberg, but some other smaller, interesting, up-and-coming Substacks. And a way to solve that problem, rather than having a bunch of my colleagues trying to assemble lists, because it changes all the time who's on Substack. Okay, boy, that is something that machine learning, AI is probably going to really help us with, because it can ingest large amounts of data, figure it out, solve a problem, going back to the discovery problem, the original problem on Substack. Now, some people will hear what I said and say, oh my gosh, that is an algorithm. Algorithms are not bad in and of themselves any more than an Excel spreadsheet or a ruler or an abacus or a calculator is bad in and of itself. They're a tool for good or evil. And whereas a traditional social media algorithm might be designed to put your attention and your eyes to an advertiser, on Substack, again, the incentives are all that we want to do is make sure people can get more readers, viewers, listeners, and if they wish to have more paid people following them and people supporting them. So I'd say, having your mission and your goals in the right place is going to help use machine learning. And I can tell you for sure, I interact with Substack writers and podcasters all day, every day. If we ever had something in the box that said, click here to have AI write your post, they would be coming with the torches and pitchforks, because the kind of people who are in our Substack community are skeptical of the idea of it's going to be done better in automated fashion. There's a huge value put on, just as you described, this artisanal aspect of creation.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, before we go, I'm going to ask you, because you got to do this, right? If you're talking to somebody on a podcast, you have to end this way. So I'm going to ask you to give me 2 sets of 3s. So I want you to give the listeners who are not using Substack 3 reasons why they should consider Substack as a platform. And then once you get done with that, I'm going to ask you for another list of 3.
So this is great. We're in an elevator. This classic elevator pitch. We're in an elevator.
Absolutely.
I've got 5 floors. Not even 20. I've got 5 floors. I would say if they do any kind of writing or creating, the reason to use Substack is it's going to be very easy for you to get started. You're not going to have to watch a bunch of videos or figure it out. Go to substack.com and you will see a button that says start writing or get your Substack or something like that, and just click on it. So it's going to be very easy for you to get started. Number 2, everything we've been talking about in the course of this conversation, the community that is there for you. Maybe you don't really want to write essays, write posts, record podcasts. Download the app and Notes is there, and you can post in short form or just read other people's. And it's going to be a welcoming community for you to get into and learn. And the third reason, I would be remiss if I did not mention money. The whole reason Substack was created in the first place is so that people could, if they wish, go out and ask their fans, their followers, their people who are dedicated to what they're doing to support them. And there's a whole feature I could talk about called pledges. We have really built things so that people are making money on Substack, and it's anywhere from a voluntary hobbyist side project, side hustle amount of money to millions of dollars. So it would be, if I'm going to give 3 reasons, one of them has got to be money. But if people are listening and they're like, oh, I don't really want to make money, I want to express myself, we're also here for you.
Okay, wonderful. Now, to those of us who are on Substack and are looking for what I call those sort of guiding principles, what are 3 things that having observed, and the team having observed, successful Substackers, and I'll leave it up to you to define what the word success means. What are 3 best practices that those Substackers, if I can create a noun here, those Substackers do, or a mindset that they have, something that others should emulate? So, I'm a Substacker. I've been here for a while. There's others that have been there. I would love to know, what are the 3 top things that you guys observe in the most successful Substackers? What are those?
The first one, quick anecdote. I had somebody who I was trying to recruit to Substack who had a big Twitter following, and they asked me, can you tell me analytically how many of my Twitter followers will convert to Substack? So I actually went to a colleague that I work with who works in data, and I said, what can you tell me about the average amount of Twitter followers that come over to Substack? And I was surprised by what he found. He said there's very little correlation between how many Twitter followers specifically somebody has and how they do on Substack. It was 11% correlation over the first 90 days. He said, and this is, of the 3 things, this is the first one. The thing that very much more dictates how well somebody will do in their first 90 days is how consistent they are and how much they post. You'd rather have an hour set aside twice a week than you would 100,000 Twitter followers. And that shocked me, because conventional thinking is, of course, you just port your followers over from one place to another. But somebody could have, and we have seen it, somebody could have a big following, but if they're not consistent on Substack, it doesn't really work. And somebody could have a modest following elsewhere. It always helps to have some seed corn elsewhere. But if you are starting from 0, it's even more important for you to be very consistent. So the first thing I would say, won't surprise anybody who's done any project on the internet, the first thing is consistency. The second thing I would say is cross-pollination through the features on Substack. And that means within the platform saying, I'm going to use recommendations. I'll recommend a bunch of other Substacks. I could reach out to the people I'm recommending and say, hey, I'm recommending you, love your work. I'd love if you check out my Substack. If they get signups from you, they're very apt to recommend you back. This is all so that people know when you see recommendations on Substack, these are not paid advertisements. It's people advocating for each other. So use recommendations, use Substack Notes, post on Substack Notes. Consider doing guest posts where you provide a guest post to another Substack writer. Their readers can find you. Consider going on podcasts, going on the podcast of somebody who has a podcast on Substack. It can be a great way to find a new audience. So really, as you sit down and you think about, okay, I know what I want to know what consistency, what sort of frequency I want to have. Second thing I need to strategize is what cross-pollination methods am I going to focus on so that I can get the word out. And I think the third thing is having a point of view, really coming with authenticity and having a point of view and a voice that you cultivate. And that is, I think, for the writers, analysts, creators I talk to who are younger, sometimes it's more of a challenge because sometimes I mentioned I talk to a lot of finance trading type writers. They think, oh, right, I've got to adopt a voice that sounds like a JP Morgan research report. It's got to be distant. It's got to be professional. And I've got to have some kind of a brand name that sounds like I'm big and important. And what I say to them is check out some of the most successful writers on Substack. You will see that it's basically they embrace the fact that it is a personal brand. They have a photograph of themselves on their about page so that they know it's a real person. And they are not afraid to say, here's my point of view. Here's my perspective. Here's what I think. Some people will disagree. Some people won't like it. It's Substack. They can unsubscribe if they disagree vehemently enough, but you will find that you attract more people who say, finally, somebody who has my point of view. So Substack is very much like that, where you don't have to fit into a paradigm. You can really have and develop your point of view and your authenticity. And I would say every writer, creator, and publisher that I've seen on Substack, and if people are wondering what I'm talking about, go to substack.com. You can click on the magnifying glass in the left-hand corner if you're on desktop, and you can look through the categories and see who the top people are in each category. And you're going to find it's very much personal brands. A lot of people, their names are at the forefront. They're bringing a point of view. So now that I've said these three things, like to what extent do these resonate with you? You've been on Substack, you've seen people who are successful, more or less successful. What do you think are the important things?
No, I certainly believe that consistency matters. I know before I started getting active on Substack, I was reading and doing research about various people who were podcasting. And there was this one gentleman, he had pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, he ran a travel website and a travel blog. And he was also an influencer, various hotels and carriers and cruises and so forth, flew him around the world. He did all this kind of stuff, right? And then all that came crashing to an end with COVID. Right?
Wow.
So he found himself going, I got to reinvent myself. I need to figure out another way to generate an income. And so he started looking at the data about followers. And what he learned is that there's obviously a high correlation between the frequency of your posting, whatever that is, whether it's written word, audible, or video. There's a correlation between that and the speed with which you will scale in terms of an audience. Now, the presupposition here is that you have content that's interesting.
Yes.
You still have to find your niche. And to the point you made earlier, your third point, have a point of view. Absolutely correct. So what he did is he said, I'm going to start a personal news aggregator podcast where it was like, think of it as 15 minutes news of the day. And then he said, I started out doing it 5 days a week. And then he said, I'm going to do it 7 days a week. Within 18 months, it was to the point that he had built a revenue stream such that it now supported him and his family. Now, some people would go, oh my God, I could never do 7 days a week. I got it. But this really underscores, maybe in boldface, your point about consistency. Because what happens is that certainly with podcasting and video, this is true of YouTube, people want to get into a rhythm. And so they will actually schedule a part of their lives to listen to you, watch what you've got, or if it's writing, they will have an expectation. And they will actually, because honestly, as a creator, when you're producing anything, whether it's written, spoken, or visual, you're asking for a very important thing, which is a part of somebody's time, which is the only thing we can't store, we can't save, in the sense that I can't put in a closet 24 hours. It's use it or lose it. And so because I only have 24 hours, and actually only a certain number of those are waking hours, a creative who comes to me and says, Mark, I want you to listen to this or watch this, you're asking me to do that thing instead of something else. And so that's a big ask. It really is. So if you're going to be consistent, be consistent, but also be mindful of the fact that you've really got a hurdle to get over, which is, are you delivering something of value where that person will make you and your deliverable a part of their lives, right? On a consistent basis, right? And yes, that's one thing that I've learned. I think the other thing, of course, is quality. In the world of podcasting, because I've done it for so many years, again, not in Substack, but other stuff, I've learned how important it is. You know, in video, in movies, they will tell you that audio or sound is more than 50% of what the audience experiences, which is pretty interesting because most people think, oh no, it's all about the images on the screen and what the camera does and so forth. Actually, it's not. We pay a lot of attention to what's going on in our ears. In an audio only podcast, that's even more critical because that's all they've got. So if it's poor quality, if you haven't done a good job, if it sounds like an echo chamber, which is one of my pet peeves, if you don't, in post processing, what I do is I remove from my episodes filler words, silences, all that sort of stuff. If you don't take the time to do that, people notice it, and you'll get graded down, if you will, in their minds of quality. I think the third thing everybody knows is you've got to have a niche. And honestly, that takes, I think I'll use a philosophical word, that's a heuristic process. It's a journey of discovery. You start with an idea and you say, this is my market, this is my niche, this is what I want to serve, right? And then you produce, in the world of podcasts, you produce a number of episodes. And this is my point about the quants, the stats, right? I look at what are people listening to? What are they paying attention to? What is the highest volume? Now, some of it could be that the person I interviewed has a great network and they passed it to their network, and that's why the downloads are high. On the other hand, I've produced some episodes that I think are absolutely fabulous, done with people I know and respect to be tremendous. My audience goes, I don't care, right? So that sort of heuristic process of discovery where I'm producing and then evaluating, producing and evaluating. For me, I tell people, I said, I'm sailing on a ship and I have a destination in mind, but I can't tell you exactly which way I need to tack to catch the wind because it depends on the day. It depends on what part of the ocean I'm in. It depends on the season. There's a lot of things. And so that's the sort of stuff that for me as a creator, that's why the feedback mechanisms of Substack are really important in helping me in my world grow and scale my podcast.
That is so fascinating. And the point that you made about time being something you cannot store, it's the non-renewable resource. People will often, when they're getting on Substack, or if they've been on a while, will ask members of my team, what's the best day of the week? What's the best time for me to send out emails? When is the best time for me to post? Clearly what they're asking for is they want to not disadvantage themselves, but they want some kind of a hack. They want to hear that Wednesday at 10 a.m. is the best time. But of course, the real answer is you simply decide to create a habit with the reader. If you are asking him or her to carve out a little bit of time, think about when you want them to carve that time out and then make it a habit. I can tell you that there's a publisher on Substack called The Transcript, and they did some experimenting and they found that 6 a.m. on Monday is a great time for them to send it out. Their audience gets into work, ready to rock for the week, sits down with a cup of coffee and opens up their Substack that they've sent out that gives them all the highlights of earnings calls that have just occurred. And then there are other people on Substack, same thematic area. Sam Rowe, he has a finance and investing Substack called The Ticker. And his promise to his audience is, I won't have a specific day of the week where I'm going to send something out. I commit to you that I will only send out a post when I really have something to say, when I really think it'll be worth your while. So he's not creating a habit based on a day of the week or a time. He's creating a habit based on, I know when I open up his post that he's just sent me, that it's going to be something he thinks is worthwhile. I'm a fan. I'm probably going to think it's worthwhile too. So all of the questions about exact time, exact day of the week, it's really much more important to be forging that connection with the reader and being intentional about it. What you were saying about the niche, the journey, a lot of this is intentionality about what you're doing. And authentic doesn't mean unprofessional. The more professionalism and the more you can spend time to cultivate it, easier said than done. We all have to, most people on Substack are not doing it as their full-time job, particularly when they've just started. But the more time people can carve out, it really has been the thing that we've seen pay off.
I think we live in a world, not only do we live in a world of short attention spans, and now this is speaking for myself, I tend to be impatient. And when I send out my Substack, my post that is the wrapper around my podcast, what I want to see is within an hour, a certain number of opens, a certain number of downloads. I'm like, dadgummit, I produced this. Pay attention. Stop your life. Listen to my show. That's crazy, right? If you produce something of quality that is not time-bound, so the news is time-bound, right? But if you produce something that has that is not super time bound, that can be either listened to almost any time or read later on, people will figure that out and they'll get to it when it makes sense for them. The key is that they get to it. And that really gets back to the whole issue of quality. And I think that's the other thing. Now, having said that, I know there are some people who are new in Substack who will obsess over a document that they're writing or a podcast that they produce, and they'll keep polishing the app, launch, get it out, get something out there. This goes back to the consistency piece. And you can improve quality over time. That's been my thing. When I started this particular podcast, I set some ambitious goals for myself. One, this was in mid-April. I'm going to interview 50 people before the end of the calendar year.
Oh, wow.
And I'm going to produce within that cohort of 50 people, I'm going to publish 2 episodes per week. Okay. So that's 8 episodes a month, right? I'm going to produce about 100 episodes before the end of the year. That takes a lot of time when the episodes are between 30 minutes and an hour long. So what that's forced me to do is to become more efficient and to also discover tools that enable me to edit, post-process faster, also follow better practices when it comes to recording, selecting the right guest. There's a whole bunch of things that I've learned, that I'm learning actually, that are all a part of achieving that stretch goal or those 2 stretch goals that I have for myself. And it's working. Within, 7 weeks, producing 2 shows a week is not a problem for me. It doesn't spin my life in contortions like it did when I started, right? So again, I think for people who are new to Substack, start producing, get into a rhythm, and then pay attention. How can I improve the quality? Maintain my rhythm. Like, that's the stake in the ground. Is it going to be once a week, once a month, 2 times a month, whatever? Put a stake in the ground. And then that becomes the organizing principle around which you then start optimization in terms of quality, content quality, et cetera, et cetera. And then it just gets richer over time because you get into a rhythm, you know what it looks like. It's this many words on a page and this many da-da-da. And maybe I add a couple of images or maybe I do a voiceover and right. But it's a rhythm. That's the other thing is you got to be patient. God, don't expect what I've had to learn. Don't expect overnight success. It takes.
Yeah, that all really resonates, especially when you start out at the cadence that you have determined, it almost feels like too much at first, but then you learn. There's a learning process. You build your own systems and processes, and it never gets easy, but it gets easier. And I'm sure you find you are spending fewer hours now, shortcuts, your style, so you can get there more quickly.
Yeah. And all of that's, but again, I think that serves the principles that you talked about earlier of consistency, or the principle of consistency. That's so important to build an audience, And then for me, at the end of this calendar year, I'm going to do a podcast at 90 days for my listeners of here's what I've learned, not about what my process is, but here's what I've learned from my guests. Here are the interesting things that I've learned. Here's what I'm observing about what people are saying and sharing and blah, 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 blah. I'll do the same thing at the end of the year, a retrospective. And then it will give me and I'll get feedback from people like, yeah, Mark, I'd like to see more of that, less of that. This is interesting. That's not, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where our audience engagement becomes really critical. So anyway, so that's where I am on my journey.
Great. You know, what you mentioned about there are no shortcuts and it just takes time. I really want to encourage people, if they're listening and they have Substacks, to keep in mind that sometimes overnight success, quote unquote, on Substack was really 10 or 20 years in the making because the person spent years building up a reputation elsewhere, building up people who knew them in the mainstream media, building up a huge Instagram account. So if you come and you feel like, wow, that person came on Substack and they had this explosive launch and they're getting all this attention. Look, they might have been digging in the corners and posting to the proverbial void 10 years ago. And then because they built up their seed corn, Substack hasn't done anything magical for them. What we're doing is giving them another set of tools so they can take it again to the next level. So I think sometimes people look and there's, some of the first really popular people to come on Substack, and that really helped us to get known were people like Matt Iglesias and Andrew Sullivan. These people had been blogging and building reputations for decades.
Right.
So it really is, I understand people will always, it's a cliche, only compete against yourself. It's okay to compete and it's okay to compare yourself to others, but just keep a sense of perspective of you're on your own journey and nobody's ever going to be able to tell you, hey, here's the secret to getting 1,000 people overnight. Just go viral. Well, you cannot prospectively have something and say, oh yeah, I know for sure this is going to go viral. If there were any of these shortcuts, all of us would be doing them and making millions of dollars on Substack. All you can do is everything that you and I have been talking about in this call, Mark, the consistency, the having your own personal point of view, going towards your niche and figuring out what that niche is. These are the fundamental things. This is not just Substack 101. This is successfully building an audience online 101.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Linda, you've been very gracious with your time today. Thank you. And I know that certainly my listeners will find this very interesting and hopefully others on Substack because, gosh, for those of us, the kind of noobs who've only been around 30, 60, 90, 120 days.
Yeah.
I think you've shared some really great insights that they will find very helpful and encouraging as they continue to grow their audience, grow their deliverable, whatever that is, continue to be creative in what I consider to be one of the finest online communities today. And I love this phrase. I wrote it down. It's the economic engine of culture.
Yes.
That's a marvelous tagline. And I had not heard that before.
Yeah.
I'm telling people, hey,
please,
you can find me on using the economic engine of culture.
It sounds so sci-fi, right? It's our North Star internally of what we're trying to be. Mark, I can't wait to see where you're at 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. Let's keep in touch and we'll check in with each other on notes. I really want to keep close tabs on your journey with it. And thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you and share all this stuff about Substack. You can tell I love talking about it. And I really hope your listeners get some truth bombs out of it.
Hey, I'm sure they will. Thanks again, Linda. And you have a great weekend.
You too, Mark. Okay, thanks so much. Take care.
I'm Mark Good. You've been listening to my remarkable podcast. For more episodes like this, as well as premium content, visit my site, markgood.substack.com.
It will bring you near. And when your soul gets humble,